Thank you for joining us today on this SoundStage Australia Talks episode. Daryl Wilson from Wilson Audio. We're going to be talking about Sasha V, which is in for review. You might see it in the background behind me, and with a review to come very soon at SoundStage Australia. Daryl, I wanted to start off by asking you about Sasha V. Some people, if we really simplify the entire thing, some people might say, okay, Sasha V is a scaled down version of bigger models using the same drivers and so on. It's obviously a much more complex thing. So what were the challenges in terms of adopting the CSC tweeter and the new Quadramag mid-range driver into a smaller cabinet as Sasha V's?
Yeah. Thank you, Edgar, for having me on, and I look forward to this conversation. Challenges. So distilling the CSC tweeter, the Quadramag mid-range, and embedding all the V material inside the enclosure, while working with new capacitors that we're manufacturing in-house. All that, it takes a lot of finessing. And the form factor of Sasha really is the evolution of the Wah-Puppy line. So you think about all the 8 versions of Wah-Puppy, and then at that point, we decided to an evolutionary change, right? So it can be connected to Wah-Puppy, but really it kind of hopped ship and became its own entity with the Sasha WP. That evolved over a couple of iterations. And when you think about the DAW going to the Sasha V, the DAW had the Convergence Energy Mark V tweeter. It's the same tweeter as the WAM Master Productsonic. Has the same mid-range as the WAM Master Productsonic. And so you look at all the innovation that's in the DAW and the binding posts that were designed specifically for that product and released with that product at that time because they were finished. And you look at that was the state of the art at the time. Now fast forward 5 years and you've got this loudspeaker that's behind me right now. You've got the development of the XVX, which had the V material. You have the development of the Alex V, the Alexi V. And so we're taking everything we learned from WAM Master Chronosonic and then the new stuff we learned from the XVX. And what I like to say is distilled evolution. So trickling all that down and making it work within the form factor of the product. And Sasha V is the beneficiary of the development of XVX, Alex V, and Alexi V.
Sure. Okay, I'd like to bring you back a little bit to the Convergence Energy carbon tweeter. So you print in-house with a 3D printer, a chamber for the or a plate for the rear chamber of the tweeter, and obviously that's designed to control backwave reflections and so on. I'm just wondering whether there was a measured difference in other aspects of tweeter's performance between the new CSC and the previous tweeter in Sasha DAW in terms of frequency response, linearity, or yes, distortions and so on. What were the measured differences between these two tweeters?
Yes, all the above. It has better high frequency extension, and it's much more linear. When the chamber is bigger, the Mark V chamber is smaller than the CSC. And what we've done is we've constructed it in a way that you can't mold. You can't create it in any other way except to 3D print it. And so we went through a process of 3D printing a lot of different types of material. And we listened to all these different types of material. And the chopped carbon fiber really was the best sounding. And not only the carbon fiber version was better sounding, we played with the thickness of the walls and the fill material, how much of the inner walls were filled. And so all those played variables into the sonic quality. So it has better high frequency extension. The rear wave really absorbs and diffuses that rear wave energy very effectively, much more than the Mark V or any of the Marks before that. And because it's more linear, the ability to cross over with the mid-range, we were able to get a much better kiss between the high frequency, the roll-off with the tweeter, and the roll-off with the mid-range.
Sure. So obviously, in terms of sonic performance, you described it as having more extension. Were there any other aspects that were different as well?
As far as sonic qualities, an openness and an airiness, I'd say, is one of the biggest benefits of the CSC tweeter. It allows those high frequencies to bloom into the room. And harmonic expression, that cymbal, when you hear a cymbal and that natural harmonic decay, that right there is preserved a lot better in the CSC versus previous versions. Not that it's 100% one and 0% the other. It's an incremental improvement in those areas.
Sure. Okay. And I've heard that too in Alexia's platform as well. Between Alexia 2 and Alexia V, there was that, as you say, the extension of the airy sort of ambient kind of capturing is superior with the CSC tweeter.
Yeah, and even the little details, the screws that were on the front faceplate, those screws are no longer there, and so the diffraction elements, there's less diffraction elements on the front. I mean, every time we iterate, we take that device under test and we say, what can we do better? What is lacking, or what can be improved, and what have we learned in the last 5 to 10 years? And we apply all that knowledge. So there's always grassroots experiments going, and there's always ways that we can refine.
Sure. One of the big changes as far as Wilson Audio is concerned was the acquisition of reliable capacitors, which obviously allows you to design your own capacitors and apply them on a bespoke basis to the evolution of the speakers. I'm just wondering, so Sasha V has a new capacitor type, which is a copper capacitor, and I'm wondering what the differences are between this new capacitor and the original design from reliable capacitors.
Yeah, great question. Back in high school when I was much younger, I never would have thought at age 45 I'd get excited about capacitors. There were other things that got me excited, but capacitors was never on my radar.
Sure.
Fast forward to now, and once again, every element. How do you iterate? How do you really extract the most sonic performance out of each element? And capacitors, ever since 2018, when we acquired RelCap, we've been developing, researching, and iterating those capacitors, and the capacitors that are in specific areas of the crossover. We've even done R&D into capacitors that are used with electronics that other manufacturers use in our industry. But setting those aside, capacitors that are used in loudspeaker applications, if they sound good in a particular loudspeaker application, doesn't necessarily mean that they'll sound good in electronics application. There are two different ways that the signal is processed. So specifically designing and developing for loudspeakers is something that we focused a lot on. We've also, over the last 2 years, we've invested about $1 million in 2 brand new machines, winding machines. One was custom made for us in Switzerland, and one was custom made for us here in the United States. And they build 2 different types of capacitors. And one of those machines we're future-proofing in every way we can. But in this application, it does particularly well with copper variants. And so we're further exploring, and we're doing rapid prototyping, and we're pushing the envelope in the copper realm. So capacitors that we're currently using in other areas have different metals, and we've wanted to use copper for a while, but it just hasn't worked. We haven't found the right formula until we were developing Sasha V. We finally found a version that works. And so Sasha V is the debut of the loudspeaker copper capacitor. It's the RelCap. It's the AudioCap XWA copper.
Sure. So is that something that's going to obviously trickle down to other models coming up? I think Sabrina X or Yvette, sorry, is probably the model that's been around the longest. Will that have its own bespoke capacitor, or is this new capacitor going to be the platform for the newer speakers moving forward?
What works well in high frequency application doesn't necessarily work well for, let's say, a bypass capacitor in the low frequencies. So just like materials research, we use a variety of different materials because in their application, we're looking for the best version of that material in a specific application. A baffle of a mid-range is much different than a surface area between a woofer and a mid-range. And so different materials will work better, and it's the same logic and the same proof that we've experienced work in the capacitor realm. And so we're starting off, and we found one, and we've developed a copper version that works in the high frequency section of the crossover, and we're developing in the mid-range, and we're developing woofer. And when those are ready, and we actually have something that is substantially better than the previous version, that's when we'll launch it and we'll release it. We're always doing grassroots development, and you know this about Wilson Audio.
Yes.
At any given time, 5-7 different grassroots experiments are going at any time. So it's not like we develop a copper capacitor for the tweeter and then we all relax for a while and it's like, oh, we're just going to trickle that down. No, that's done, and we've got all these other experiments that are going on at the same time. And so would that copper capacitor benefit the next product? I feel yes, and it will continue. And all the other grassroots experiments that we're working on right now. The point that we rest on our laurels, we sit on our hands and we say, we've done enough research, that's when I feel like we'll lose momentum and products will suffer. I never want to feel that way.
Sure. I wanted to touch also on another new aspect of Sasha V is V cable. So obviously you experimented with different concoctions of materials and so on. So how does that process, give us an insight on how that process works?
Just like every element inside a loudspeaker, we're experimenting and developing and looking for ways to improve. So go back to the beginning of Wilson Audio's history and cables that were developed and specifically wound by my dad for the WAM. And then you go into the Watt and the Watt Puppy, and we used MIT cables for a long time, and we worked with MIT to create a specific puppy tail. And then we worked with Transparent to create the 5.1, the puppy tail for the 5.1. We've got raw spools of transparent cable, and we've hand twisted and we custom make, even till this day, cables for the tweeter section, the mid-range section, and the woofer section. And even the cables that come in from the main and connector plate to the crossovers, they all have a specific and calculated twist ratio to them. So that hasn't changed at Wilson Audio. We will always experiment and try to find the best version. And we came across a specific formula that works exceptionally well from the inside of the enclosure, from the main and connector plates to the crossovers and to the driver. A lot of people will try to make the leap of faith. Well, is Wilson Audio getting into the cable business? No. Just like when we were developing cables for loudspeakers internally for the last 5 decades, no, we have no desire to go into the cable business. So this is just one more step along that evolutionary chain that we found a formula that works very well, that is better than the previous formula, and we'll continue to explore in capacitors and binding posts and drivers and materials and everything that we do.
Sure. Okay, so in light of all these new technologies, and refinements that have been applied to Sasha V. I'm just wondering if you can give us an insight into some of the listening processes and what you're actually looking for when I guess, voicing the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
How much back and forth is there? How much trial and error between different cable types or different capacitor types, and different crossover components and so on? How much of that happens, and how does that process work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. While I was out in Australia, and I came in to visit with you, one of the evenings we went and listened in the Sydney Opera House.
Yes.
That experience, that sound, that's what I'm trying to get close to. Not just my favorite recording, right? Because favorite recordings, we don't know exactly where the mics were or what the recording engineer is putting in there is potentially artificial sweeteners. So when I travel, whether it's Sydney Opera House or the Concertgebouw or the Musikverein or locally at a Brokenell Hall, I want whatever's coming out of our loudspeakers to get as close to that as possible. And so my dad and I would call it calibrating our ears, and we calibrate our ears to live unamplified music first. And that's what we're trying to achieve. All these improvements, all these modifications and distilled evolution, it's hopefully pushing that product closer to that sound, to that experience.
True. Okay, well, Daryl, thank you for those insights. And like I say, I'm very much enjoying the process of reviewing Sasha V at the moment. It's in the background behind me in a lovely blue color. So the review will be coming out in the next few weeks or so. And thank you once again for your, for your time and your great insights.
Yeah. I look forward to reading your insights and your experience. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Daryl.